How and Why Our Oceans Are Dying, an environmental project by Molly Dennis. Oceans have always been seen as a useful transport route, an inexhaustible supply of food, but also a convenient dumping ground, and it's just too vast for anyone to do anything about it. And so people think that they can get off scot-free without any consequences because the ocean doesn't affect their everyday lives. Unfortunately, we have pushed oceans far past their limits over the past couple of decades, and now we're going to be paying the price for a long time if we don't start to do anything about it. The major threats to our oceans now are unsustainable fishing, inadequate production, tourism and development, shipping, oil and gas, pollution, aquaculture, and climate change. If we don't start to impact these major issues that are killing our ocean today, then we may never be able to get our ocean back to what it once was. The first issue we're going to cover is unsustainable fishing. Did you know that 90% of the world's fisheries are already fully exploited or overfished, while billions of unwanted fish and other animals die needlessly each year? Unsustainable fishing is the largest threat to ocean life and habitats, not to mention the livelihood and food security of over 1 billion people. Keep in mind, it's not just animals that humans aren't a fan of that are dying. It's also marine turtles, dolphins, seabirds, sharks, and even corals are dying because of the inefficient, illegal, and destructive fishing practices that people keep letting continue, even though we all know how detrimental it's been to our oceans. On top of that, every year, vibe-catching kills over 100 million sharks, 300,000 small whales and dolphins, and 250,000 turtles. You may be wondering why this is even happening. Why don't people take control or step up? Overfishing is happening because of a lot of reasons. One, because of poor fisheries management. A lot of people are just really greedy for money and they don't care much about the overall environmental health that comes at such a toll when killing this many fish and trying to mass grab this many ocean wildlife at one time because there's just so many awful effects. Also, pirate fishers don't respect fishing laws or agreements, and they'll just go through and put lines, and they'll drag lines behind their ships for hours on end, and then they'll catch a bunch of fish that are like sharks and stuff that are illegal to be, you're not allowed to fish for sharks in those waters. Also, the massive bycatch of juvenile fish and other marine animals, because they can get more money on getting the juvenile fish. Also, subsleds that keep too many boats on the water. So if there's too many boats in the water and too many boats are using this method of bycatching, then they're going to catch way too many fish and cause even more problems, even though it's because it's all different companies, so they don't know how many fish they're all taking. In addition to this, there's also the Unfair Fisheries Partnership Agreement, and this allows foreign fleets to overfish in waters of developing countries, which is super unfair because developing countries, they don't quite have the same amount of efficiency that these huge companies do. So developing countries might not even get enough food because they can't even get their own fish because these huge companies are coming in and taking all of their fish. And all of these destructive fishing practices have led to this mass issue today. You're probably wondering how this actually impacts our environment directly. The impacts of declining fish catches are being painfully felt in a lot of coastal fishing communities all around the world. We earlier said about the developing countries and their lack of ability to get food because all these huge companies are coming in, and that's a huge impact because then their environments can't thrive. On top of that, Newfoundland in Canada is a really great example of how this is impacting our environment. Because for centuries, cod stocks of their Great Banks seemed inexhaustible. But then in 1992, their cod fishery completely collapsed, and 40,000 people lost their jobs overnight. including 10,000 fishermen, just because of how much they were overfishing. Because now, 20 years later, they still have no indication that cods are going to come back in the ways that they used to. And now their environment and ecosystem has completely shifted, not just on land, not just in the water, but also on land. And now their cods may never make a comeback, and there's nothing they can do about it now because they waited too long. All of this information was provided by the Worldwide Fund for Nature, where they research a lot of environmental issues that contribute to environmental and animal health. Our next issue that we're covering is how much pollution is in our ocean and how it's affected our ocean. So, as we all know, pollution in our oceans is very prevalent. You almost can never go to a beach that doesn't have at least a plastic bottle somewhere, or go diving and find something that's not in the ocean that's not supposed to be. And because all streams flowing to rivers and all rivers leading to the sea, the oceans are the endpoint for so much of the pollution that we produce on land, even if they're very far from the ocean. And from all those dangerous carbon emissions to choking plastic to leaking oil to constant noise, the types of ocean pollution humans generate are vast. And as a result, collectively, the impact on our seas is degrading the health of our seas and the creatures in them at an alarming rate. Flora and Fauna International has been addressing marine plastic pollution for several years. And it's a less known side effect, microplastics. These tiny particles are what is left when a larger plastic item breaks down over time. So a plastic bag, for example, over time, after constantly being in the ocean, will break down, and because plastic never truly goes away, they turn into what we now know as microplastics. And they enter the ocean directly as microbeads. And the fibers from synthetic clothing that enter waterways from domestic washing machines, basically, when animals eat these things, they have devastating consequences. Like, it messes up their internal system, and they basically can't help themselves because they can't, they're not aware that they're eating it because it's so small. Most of the waste that is actually in our oceans right now has only existed for the past 60 years and enters the ocean each year. That's a lot of plastic coming in. Did you know that when we're burning fossil fuels into our atmosphere, we're not just polluting the air, but we're also polluting our oceans? Today, seas absorb as much of a quarter of all man-made carbon emissions. And obviously that's going to change the pH of the surface waters that leads to acidification. And this problem is constantly getting worse. With the constant burning of fossil fuels in our atmosphere, we are constantly causing more acid, we're constantly boosting the acidity of our oceans. By the end of this century, if we don't stop this problem, then our surface waters could be nearly 150% more acidic by the end of the century than they are right now. And if you ask me, that's pretty scary. Another form of pollution is oil spills. They cause huge amounts of damage to the marine environment, and they're responsible for only about 12% of the oil that's entering our seas each year. According to a study by the U.S. National Research Council, 36% comes down drains and rivers as waste and runoff from cities and industry. So oil spills like the BP oil spill aren't just our only concern. We also have to worry about all of the runoff that's collecting and gathering in our oceans. Oil spills have huge and immediate economic, social, and environmental impacts. Local people lose their livelihoods when all the fishery and tourism gets closed down so that they can clean up. And also, tens of thousands of marine life and animals and plants are killed or harmed. But the damage goes on. The chemicals used to break up the oil can be toxic, and it is impossible to remove all the spilled oil because once it mixes with the water, it is way too hard to get out. Even after an area has been cleaned up, it can take a decade or more to even fully recover. One of the worst oil spills on record is the Eureka oil spill. The Eureka broke in half, and roughly it lost 10,000 tons of oil into the sea. And it washed up on a French beach, and most of the birds, it was considered more humane to kill them than to clean them, because most of the ones that were cleaned still died. So here's what you can do about the pollution of our oceans. 1. Reduce your use of single-use plastics. Wherever you go, try to deny getting an extra grocery bag if you think that you can bring your own every time. Just so we can keep this plastic out of our oceans where it always inevitably ends up. Also, recycle your plastic. Just 9% of plastic is recycled worldwide, and if we can bring that number up by a lot, then we won't have as much plastic in our oceans. Also, you can participate in or even organize a beach or river cleanup. We all know that all drains lead to the ocean, and also all of our riverbanks do too. Make sure your riverbanks stay clean and try to keep oil from draining down. Also, support bans on single-use plastics. Therefore, we can be able to help the circulation of all of these plastic going around to stop. Also, avoid products containing microbeads. These microbeads that get stuck everywhere, and when they get into the ocean, animals eat them unknowingly. Also, spread the word. Stay informed on these issues of today. If you can know what's going on, then you can help prevent it. Also, remember to support organizations that are addressing all of the plastic pollution in our oceans. Just remember, your support means everything. So if you can get out there and help. Remember, you live on this earth too. So any of these things that are happening to our oceans now, they will affect you later. As long as you remember that, then we can all work together and stop this problem. Thank you.